Hi, I'm Carl Conrad and welcome to the weekly edition of Australian Immigration News, proudly brought to you by Australian Immigration Law Services right here in Sydney. Tonight we have a jam-packed program. The ACT is first off the mark for sending invitations for the 190 and 491 visa. Victoria Dan Andrews is wooing the Immigration Minister for more migrants. Treatment of international students under the spotlight in a education review. Revelations for the upcoming genuine student test, which will soon replace the dreaded GTE. Universities are worried about students leaving higher education and going to study and work in aged care for a quicker PR outcome. The Australian Border Force actively monitors businesses that sponsors workers. And Pacific Islanders allegedly being mistreated by a Tasmanian labour hire company. The Australian Capital Territory seems the first off the mark to send out invitations for the 491 and 190 visas, not waiting like the rest of the states and territories for their federal government allocation of sponsorship numbers. They have got stuck right into it. However, the figures are not great for those who have made an effort to live and work in the ACT. People overseas have received a far greater number of invitations, as you can see from the figures here. More than double for the 190 visa and nearly triple for the 491 visa. One has to question why the imbalance. Is Canberra just trying to use those who are living and working there and just greedy for more skilled workers to get into their territory?
That's really weird.
And down in Victoria, the Premier Dan Andrews is super keen to get more migrants into his state, despite all the calls about where they're going to live. He expressed his hope that more people will be coming to his state shortly in an interview on the Italian Globo TV network.
We've got a skills crisis. We can't find enough people to play all the different roles that we need, to build the projects we need to build, to run the services we need to run. I've always been a very strong supporter of more skilled migration, and the new federal government have taken some important steps towards increasing the amount of permanent skilled migration, but I think they might need to do more again. Prime Minister Albanese knows this. I've spoken to him about it personally, and part of it also is clearing the visa backlog. There were nearly 1 million visa applications sitting in an in-tray waiting to be processed. It does take some time, but I know Andrew Giles, my good friend, another Victorian, the Minister for Immigration, is working very hard on that.
Clearly, he believes the federal government needs to increase migration numbers to fill the needs of his state. Victoria state sponsorship should be supercharged to take as many people as they are allocated for this financial year. Everyone get ready for when the Victoria Registration of Interest program begins again shortly. The Australian Border Force is warning all business sponsors of temporary workers that they are out there every day monitoring your sponsorship obligations. As the article in The Australian says, be ready. No business under this arrangement is immune from us having a look at their practices. All businesses sponsoring workers on temporary visas better have their tea and biscuits ready when they come knocking on your door. And just as a helpful tip, they are not allowed to conduct searches or interview people in the workplace without notifying the owners of the businesses first. And speaking about looking into business practices, a Tasmanian labour hire company has been reported in the Fijian Times as being under investigation over alleged mistreatment of Pacific Islander workers. These workers are in Australia holding visas under the new PALM scheme. Not the sort of publicity Australia needs right now for our Pacific neighbours. Even programs with the best intentions can be hijacked by people doing the wrong thing. Good to see in a way that has been quick to be reported and followed up by authorities. We urge any Pacific Islanders working in Australia under this visa stream to come forward to the government when they feel they are being mistreated. Our higher education sector is not performing too well, according to an interim report commissioned by the Education Department's Minister Jason Clare. The release of this report set off a flurry of media articles, some of which did focus on the plight of international students studying in Australia.
International students have flooded back into the country, but they are returning to a university system that is not only facing precarious funding for research, but widespread criticisms of the quality and quantity of teaching and students that it is producing, both domestically and for the international education market.
At the National Press Club, the Minister was asked if it was fair to invite international students to Australia during a period of heightened expenses.
International student fees are one of the most important sources of revenue for Australian universities. And in fact, the report says some universities are over-reliant on international student fees. But at the same time, statistics show that international students are up 25% from a year ago, in fact, slightly higher than that. At the same time, we're seeing rising housing shortages, rising rents, and whether or not that's partially due to international students, they're certainly affected by it. Is it fair for us to keep welcoming growing numbers of international students when they're coming to a country where they are paying very, very high rents? It's so high, in fact, that some of them are spacing out their courses to work to afford to pay the rent.
Well, you're seeing domestic students do that as well. Talk to some of the Vice-Chancellors here, they'll tell you that we're seeing more students on a part-time load this year than years before. And that part of that is paying the bills. You know, the housing crisis that you touched on here is a challenge for all Aussies.
Yes, it is true. This is a problem that all Australia faces, not just international students. However, what he should have pointed out is that international students are no doubt feeling unwelcomed in Australia, with all of these media stories blaming them for the increase in rental prices. However, on the other hand, not all regions are saying we have too many international students. The University of Tasmania has seen a drop in international students, causing them a $20 million shortfall, according to this Herald Sun article. Perhaps the government needs to be selective to where all these international students are going. And if there is still space in our regional campuses and cities, shouldn't we focus more on sending them there? In fact, Townsville is crying out for more international students, as this article is highlighting. Since the Aged Care Labour Agreement was announced last month, higher education providers have been a little nervous of losing international students from their courses. The Herald Sun ran a story about one aged care provider in Victoria which recently received approval for 400 workers to sponsor. The International Education Association of Australia has major concerns about the loss of many international students from the higher education sector to work visas in the aged care sector. Tonight, I continue the interview with Phil Honeywood, the CEO of IEAA, about this and the new upcoming Genuine Student Test. First, Phil, what's been happening lately about the old GTE test and the student visa applications?
Happily, we're getting rid of the GTE. So we've put together a working group which has the support of the Home Affairs Minister's Office to put forward, and they're going to work as technical experts who have a background in emissions compliance and so on with the Department of Home Affairs at the ground level to redesign what we now call going forward, we call a genuine student test rather than a genuine temporary entrant test.
You know, the GTE has for so long been the worst integrity issue in the migration program, where the system forces international students to lie on their GTE statements about coming to Australia with the intention of gaining a migration outcome.
And that's an acknowledgement by the government of your point. If we're going to, for example, increase post-study work right duration for an additional 2 years, particularly for skills in demand, then you're inviting a young person to come to our country for 3 or 4 years average study, plus potentially 5 years post-study work right visa. That's a decade out of their lives. And then we say goodbye, go home. So there's now a total acknowledgement by the federal government that not being allowed to suggest that you might want to have a migration outcome at the conclusion of your student visa is not feasible anymore. And so, GTE is going to be replaced with GSE, Genuine Student Entry.
And Phil, tell us your organisation's concerns about the Aged Care Labour Agreement pathway to permanent residency.
We've also got, Carl, the nonsense of the Certificate 3 aged care certificate, where we're going to have potentially postgrad students, master's students dropping out of their course into a very cheap, very short duration Certificate 3 aged care diploma, diploma certificate, in order to get a guaranteed migration outcome if they work for 2 years with the aged care industry. Now,
do you think these students, once they get PR, will end up continuing to work in the aged care sector?
I'm predicting that we're going to have a lot of students whose aptitude for aged care may not be appropriate, but we'll see it as a guaranteed fast-track migration outcome or pathway. And then will they be working in aged care 2 years hence? Well, once they've got PR, they don't need to.
I guess we'll have to see how this all pans out in the near future. Thanks, Phil, for coming on the show to share your thoughts on these important issues. I'm sorry, I've been a little busy this week to do the readers' comment sections, but we'll get back to that next week. All of your comments are highly valued, even the ones who write in each week asking the same question. Any word on their visa processing times? I really wish that we could help in relation to visa processing times, but we are limited in what we can achieve sometimes. However, if you need help, we are always here to assist. You can book an appointment online or just pick up the dog and bone. Stay tuned for our next riveting edition. And as always, take care out there and I'll see you next time. So bye for now.